set your radios to spooky. Then crank the dial all the way past that into full-on blood-soaked screaming horror. Welcome to PseudoPod. PseudoPod is made entirely by humans in service of an ancient being wider than time and older than hope. She's nice. Says hello. PseudoPod, episode 1014, January 30th, 2026. This week's story, Faith, Hope and Charity, by Irvin S. Cobb. Narrated for you by Kevin M. Hayes. Hosted by Alasdair Stuart, with audio by Chelsea Davis. Welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alasdair, your host, and this week's story comes to us from Irvin S. Cobb. Cobb, born June 23, 1876, died March 11, 1944, was an American author, humorist, and columnist who lived in New York and authored more than 60 books and 300 short stories. He was born in Paducah, Kentucky, where he began as a reporter for the Paducah Daily News at the age of 17. He became the nation's youngest managing news editor 2 years later, and his career took him to media and artistic prominence in New York, where his Saturday Evening Post columns reached over 2 million readers. He was such a well-known and well-loved figure that he hosted the 7th Academy Awards ceremony. Our narrator this week is Kevin M. Hayes. Kevin began his involvement in science fiction, fantasy and horror at a very young age as an insatiable reader. Eventually, he grew from passive reader to active participant as writer, and then he became involved with Parsec, the SFFH organization in western Pennsylvania, and had his first story, Rumpled Bedfellows, published in a fan-produced anthology called Six from Parsec. It isn't clear how Kevin became involved with PseudoPod, Escape Pod, Podcastle and Cast of Wonders, but when he found them, he knew he wanted to narrate stories as well as write, and has had the good fortune to have done it for over 8 years, and we're very, very glad to have him. Likewise, we're extremely glad to have Chelsea on audio production, and me as your guide. In fact, I'm your guide. I'm your GUIDE to the other side of this episode. But first, let's do a little charity, because the truth is, if we don't, it'll be done to us.
Faith, Hope and Charity by Irvin S. Cobb. Narrated by Kevin M. Hayes. Just outside a sizable New Mexico town, the second section of the fast-through train coming from the coast made a short halt. Entering the stretch leading to the yards, the engineer had found the signal set against him. The track ahead was temporarily blocked. It was a small delay, though. Almost at once the semaphore, like the finger of a mechanical wizard, made the warning red light vanish and a green light appear instead. So, at that, the Limited got underway and rolled on into the station for her regular stop. But before she started up, 4 travelers quitted her. They got out on the off side, the side farthest away from the town. And that probably explains why none of the crew and none of the other passengers saw them getting out. It helps also to explain why they were not missed until quite some time later. Their manner of leaving her was decidedly unusual. First, one of the vestibule doors between the 3rd sleeping car and the 4th sleeping car opened, and the trap in the floor flipped up briskly under the pressure of an impatient foot on the operating lever. A brace of the departing ones came swiftly into view, one behind the other. True, there was nothing unusual about that, but as they stepped down on the earth, they faced about and received the figure of a 3rd person whose limbs dangled and whose head lolled back as they took the dead weight of him into their arms. Next, there emerged the 4th and last member of the group, he being the one who had eased the limp figure of number 3 down the car steps and into the grasp of his associates. For a fractional space, their shapes made a little huddle in the lee of the vestibule. Looking on, you might have guessed that there was a momentary period of indecision, touching on the next step to be taken. However, this muddle, if that's what it was, right away straightened itself out. Acting with movements which seemed difficult and awkward, the 2 burden-bearers carried their unconscious load down the short embankment and deposited it on the cindery underfooting close against the flank of the slightly built-up right-of-way. Number 4 bent over the sprawled form and fumbled at it, shoving his hands into first one pocket and then another. In half a minute or less, he straightened up and spoke to the remaining pair, at the same time using both hands to shove some article inside the vent of his waistcoat. "I have got them," he said, speaking with a foreign accent. They pressed toward him, their hands extended. "Not here, and not yet, senores," he said sharply. "First, we make sure of the rest. First you do, please, as I do." Thereupon he hopped nimbly up the shoulder of the roadbed and headed toward the rear of the halted train, slinking well in under the overhang of the Pullmans. His mates obeyed his example. They kept on until they had passed the tail coach, which was a combination coach. And then they stepped inward between the rails, still maintaining their single file formation. Immediately the dusk swallowed them up. There was something peculiar about the way each one of these 3 plodding pedestrians bore himself. The peculiarity was this: he bore himself like a person engaged in prayer, in a silent, perambulating act of piety. His head was tucked in, his face turning neither to the right nor the left. His eyes were set steadfastly forward as though upon some invisible goal, his hands clasped primly together in front of him. Thus and so the marching 3 plodded on until the train, having got in motion, was out of sight beyond a curve in the approach to the station. Then they checked and came together in a clump, and then, had you been there, you would have understood the reason for their devotional pose. All 3 of them were wearing handcuffs. The man who had spoken before unpalmed a key ring which he was carrying. Working swiftly, even in the half-darkness, he made tests of the keys on the ring until he found the proper keys. He freed the wrists of his 2 fellows, and then one of them took the keys and unlocked his set of bracelets for him. He, it would seem, was the most forethoughted of the trio. With his heel he kicked shallow gouges in the gritty soil beside the track, and buried the handcuffs therein. After that, they briefly confabbed together, and the upshot of the confab was that, having matched for the possession of some object evidently held to be of great value, they separated forces. One man set off alone on a detour to the southeast, which would carry him around the town. His late companions kept on in a general westerly direction, heading toward the desert which all that day they had been traversing. They footed it fast, as men might foot it who were fleeing for their lives, and yet must conserve their strength. As a matter of fact, they were fleeing for their lives. So likewise the one from whom they had just parted was fleeing for his life. It was partly by chance that these 3 had been making the transcontinental journey in company. 2 of them, Lafitte the Frenchman, and Verdi the Italian, who had anglicized his name and called himself Green, met while lying in jail at San Francisco, awaiting deportation to their respective countries. Within a space of a month, each had been arrested as a refugee from justice. The formalities for extraditing the pair of them were swiftly completed. So, to save trouble and expense, to kill as it were 2 birds with 1 stone, the authorities decided to send them together across to the eastern seaboard, where, according to arrangements made by cable, they would be surrendered to police representatives coming from abroad to receive them and transport them back overseas. For the long trip to New York, a couple of city detectives had them in custody. When the train bearing the officers and their charges reached a junction in Lower California where the main line connected with a branch line running south to the Mexican border, there came aboard a special agent of the Department of Justice who had with him a prisoner. This prisoner was one Manuel Gaza, a Spaniard. He also recently had been captured and identified, and he also was destined for return to his own land. It was not by prior agreement that he had been retransferred at this junction point to the same train which carried the Italian and the Frenchman. It just happened so. It having happened so, the man who had Gaza in tow lost no time in getting acquainted with his San Francisco brethren. For a number of reasons, it seemed expedient to all the officers that from here on they should travel as a unit. Accordingly, the special agent talked with the Pullman conductor and exchanged the reservations he previously had booked for a compartment adjoining the drawing room in which the four from the city were riding. It was on a Friday afternoon that the parties united. Friday evening, at the first call for dinner, the three officers herded their three prisoners forward to the dining car, the passage of the sextet through the aisles causing some small commotion. Their advent into the diner created another little sensation. Since it was difficult for the handcuffed aliens to handle knife and fork, they were given such food as might readily be eaten with a spoon or with the fingers: soups and omelets and soft vegetables and pie or rice pudding. The detectives ate fish. They shared between them a double order of imported kippers. Presumably, they were the only persons on the train who that day had chosen the kippered herrings. Shortly, the special agent was giving private thanks that his church prescribed no dietetic regulations for Friday, because within an hour or two after leaving the table, the San Francisco men were suffering from violent cramps. Ptomaine poison had them helpless. One seemed to be dangerously ill. That night, near the border between California and Arizona, he was taken off the train and carried to a hospital. During the wait at the station, a local physician dosed the second and lesser sufferer, whose name was McAvoy, and when he had been somewhat relieved, the doctor gave him a shot of something in the arm and said he ought to be up and about within 24 hours. Through the night, McAvoy slept in the lower berth of the compartment, and the special agent sat up with the communicating door open to guard the aliens, who were bedded in the so-called drawing room. Their irons stayed on their wrists. Their lone warden was accepting no foolish odds against himself. He had taken the precaution to transfer the keys of the Frenchman's handcuffs and the Italian's handcuffs from McAvoy's keeping to his own, slipping them on his key ring. But this had been done in case McAvoy should become seriously ill en route, and it should devolve upon him to make a lap of the journey single-handed. Next morning, McAvoy was much easier, but he felt weak, he said, and drowsy. Given a full 12 hours of rest, though, he thought he would be able to go on guard when the nightfall came. So he lay in his berth, and the special agent occupied an end of the drawing-room sofa. The trapped fugitives sat smoking cigarettes, and when the officer was not too near, talking amongst themselves. Mainly they talked in English, a language which Gaza the Spaniard and Lafitte the Frenchman spoke fairly well. Verdi, or Green as the case might be, had little English at his command, but Gaza, who had spent 3 years in Naples, spoke Italian, and so when Verdi used his own tongue, Gaza would interpret for the Frenchman's benefit. They were allowed to quit the drawing-room only for meals. When dinner hour came on that second evening of their trip, McAvoy was in a doze, so the Department of Justice man did not disturb him. "Come on, boys," he said to the 3 aliens. "Time to eat again." He lined them up in front of him in the corridor, and they started the regular processional. It was just at that moment that the train broke its rhythmic refrain and began to clack and creak and slow for that unscheduled stop outside that New Mexico town. By the time they had reached the second car on ahead, she had almost stopped and was lurching and jerking. In the vestibule beyond the second car, the special agent was in the act of stepping across the iron floor lip of the connection when a particularly brisk joggle caused him to lose his hat. He gave a small exclamation and bent to recover it. In doing so, he jostled Gaza, the third man in the line, and therefore the next to him. The agile Spaniard was quick to seize his chance. He half-turned, and bringing his chained wrists aloft, sent them down with all his might on the pall of the officer's unprotected skull. The victim of the assault never made a sound, just spraddled on his face and was dead to the world. No outsider had been witness to the assault, No outsider came along during the few seconds which were required by the late prisoners to open an offside car door and make their escape, after the fashion which already has been described for you. Nobody missed them. For quite a while, nobody did. It wasn't until nearly 9 o'clock, when McAvoy had roused up and rung for the porter and begun to ask questions, that a search was made and an alarm raised. Penned up together through the day, the aliens had matched stories, one story against another. Common plight had made them communicative. A common peril caused each to turn with morbid reiteration to his own fatal predicament. Said the Frenchman to the Spaniard, "He," indicating his recent cellmate, the Italian, "he knows how with me it stands. With him I have talked. He speaks not so well the English, but sometimes he understands it. Now you shall hear and judge for yourself how bad my situation is." Graphically, this criminal sketched his past. He had been a Marseille dockhand. He had killed a woman. She deserved killing, so he killed her. He had been caught, tried, convicted, condemned. While lying in prison with execution day only a few weeks distant, he had made a getaway. In disguise, he had reached America, and here had stayed 3 years. Then another woman, in a fit of jealousy, betrayed him to the police. He had been living with that woman. To her he had given his confidence. It would appear that women had been his undoing. "Me, I'm as good as dead already, and what a death!" A spasm of shuddering possessed him. "For me, the guillotine is waiting. The devil invented it. It is so. They go at you with that machine. They strap you flat upon a board. Face downward you are, but you can look up. You can see. That is the worst part. They fit your throat into a grooved shutter. They make it fast. You bring your head back. Your eyes are drawn upward, fascinated. Above you, waiting, ready, poised, your eyes see the knife." "But only for a moment do you see it, my friend," said the Spaniard, in the tone of one offering comfort. "Only a moment, and then, poof, it's all over." "A moment? I tell you it is an eternity. It must be an eternity. Lying there you must live 100 lives. You must die 100 deaths. And then to have your head taken off your body, to be all at once in 2 pieces. Me, I am not afraid of most deaths, but that death by the guillotine. Ah!" The Spaniard bent forward. He was sitting alone, facing the other two, who shared a seat. "Listen, senor," he stated. "Compared with me, you are the lucky one. True, I have not yet been tried. Before they could try me, I fled away out of that accursed Spain of mine." "Not tried, eh?" broke in the Frenchman. "Then you have yet a loophole, a chance for escape, and I have none. My trial, as I told you, is behind me." "You do not know the Spanish courts. It is plain you do not, since you say that," declared the Spaniard. "Those courts, they are greedy for blood. With them, to my kind, there is not mercy, there is only punishment. And such punishment, wait until you hear. To me, when they get me before them, they will say, 'The proof is clear against you. The evidence has been thus and so. You are adjudged guilty. You took a life, so your life must be taken. It is the law.' Perhaps I say, 'Yes, but that life I took swiftly and in passion and for cause. For that one the end came in an instant, without pain, without lingering, yes, without warning. Since I must pay for it, why cannot I also be made to die very quickly without pain?' Will they listen? No, they send me to the garrote. To a great strong chair they tie you, your hands, your feet, your trunk. Your head is against a post, an upright. In that post is a collar, an iron band. They fit that collar about your neck. Then, from behind you, the executioner turns a screw. If he chooses, he turns it slowly. The collar tightens. A knob presses into your spine. You begin to strangle. Oh, I have seen it myself, I know. You expire by inches. I am a brave man, senores. When one's time comes, one dies. But, oh, senores, if it were any death but that, better the guillotine than that, better anything than that. He slumped against the cushions, and rigors passed through him. It was the Italian's turn. I was tried in my absence, he explained to the Spaniard. I was not even there to make my defense. I had thought it expedient to depart, such is the custom of the courts in my country. They try you behind your back. They found me guilty, those judges. In Italy there is no capital punishment, so they sentenced me to life imprisonment. It is to that I now return. The Spaniard lifted his shoulders. The lifting was eloquent in his meaning. Not so fast, said the Italian. You tell me you lived once in Italy. Have you forgotten what life imprisonment for certain acts means in Italy? It means solitary confinement. It means you are buried alive. They shut you away from everyone in a tight cell. It is a tomb, that is all. You see no one, ever. You hear no voice, ever. If you cry out, no one answers. Silence, darkness, darkness, silence, until you go mad or die. Can you picture what that means to one of my race, to an Italian who must have music, sunshine, talk with his fellows, sight of his fellows? It is in his nature. He must have these things, or he is in torture, in constant and everlasting torment. Every hour becomes to him a year, every day a century, until his brain bursts asunder inside his skull. Oh, they knew, those fiends who devised this thing, what to an Italian is 1,000,000 times worse than death, any death. I am the most unfortunate one of the three of us. My penalty is the most dreadful by far. The others would not have it so. They argued the point with him and with each other all through the day, and twilight found their beliefs unshaken. Then, under the Spaniard's leadership, came their deliverance out of captivity. It was he who, on the toss-up, won the revolver, which they had taken from the person of the senseless special agent. Also, it was he who suggested to the Italian that, for the time being at least, they stick together. To this the Italian had agreed, the Marseille man, Lafitte, having already elected to go on his own. After the latter, heading east by south, had left them, the Spaniard said reflectively, He is optimistic, that one, for all that he seemed so gloomy and downhearted today when speaking of that guillotine of his. He said he now had faith that he would yet dodge his fate. 5 minutes after he is off that train, he speaks of faith. I cannot go quite so far, answered the Italian. We are free, but for us there will still be 1,000 dangers. So I have not much faith. But I have hope. And you, my friend? The Spaniard shrugged his shoulders. His shrug might mean yes, or it might mean no. Perhaps he needed his breath. He was going at a jog-trot down the tracks, the Italian alongside him. Take the man who had faith. Set down as he was in a country utterly strange to him, this one of the fugitives nevertheless made steady progress. He got safely around and by the New Mexico town. He hid in the chaparral until daybreak, then took to a highway running parallel with the railroad. A tin canner, which is what they were beginning to call an itinerant motor tourist in those parts, overtook him soon after sunup and gave him a lift to a small way station some 40 miles down the line. There he boarded a local train. He had some money on him, not much money, but enough, and undetected he rode that train clear on through to its destination 100 miles or so farther along. Other local trains carried him across a corner of Colorado and clear across Kansas. Some 48 hours later, he was a guest in a third-rate hotel on a back street in Kansas City, Missouri. He stayed in that hotel for 2 days and 2 nights, biding most of the time in his room on the top floor of the 6-story building, going down only for his meals and for newspapers. The food he had to have. The newspapers gave him information, of a sort, of the hunt for the 3 fugitives. It was repeatedly stated that all 3 were believed to be fleeing together. That cheered Lafitte very much. It strengthened his faith. But on the morning of his 3rd day in this cheap hotel, when he came out of his room and went down the hall to ring for the elevator — there was only one passenger elevator in this hotel — he saw something. Passing the head of the stairs, which ended approximately midway down the stretch between the door of his room and the wattled iron door opening on the elevator, well, he saw, out of the corner of his one watchful eye, 2 men in civilian garb on the steps below him. They had halted there. Whether they were coming up or going down, there was no way of telling. It seemed to him that at sight of him they ducked slightly and made as if to flatten themselves back against the side wall. He gave no sign of having seen them. He stilled an impulse to make a dash for it. Where was he to dash for, with the stairs cut off? He followed the only course open to him. Anyhow, he told himself, he might be wrong. Perhaps his nerves were misbehaving. Perhaps those 2 who seemed to be lurking just there behind him on those steps were not interested in him at all. He kept telling himself that while he was ringing the bell, while he was waiting for the car to come up for him. The car did come up, and, for a wonder, promptly. An old-fashioned car, creaky, musty. Except for its shirt-sleeved attendant, it was empty. As Lafitte stepped in, he glanced sideways over his shoulder, making the movement casual. No sight of those 2 fellows. He rode down, the only passenger for that trip, so there were no stops on the descent. They reached the ground floor, which was the office floor. The elevator came to a standstill, then moved up a foot or so, then joltingly down 6 inches or so, as the attendant, who was not expert, maneuvered to bring the sill of the car flush with the tiling of the lobby. The delay was sufficiently prolonged for Lafitte to realize all in a flash he had not been wrong. Through the intervening grill of the shaft door, he saw 2 more men who pressed close up to that door, who stared in at him, whose looks and poses were watchful, eager, prepared. Besides, Lafitte knew plainclothesmen when he saw them. Up above, and here below, he was cut off. There still was a chance for him, a poor one, but the only one. If he could shoot the elevator aloft quickly enough, check it at the 3rd floor, or the 4th, say, and hop out, he might make a successful dart for the fire escape at the rear of the hotel, provided the fire escape was not guarded. In the space of time that the elevator boy was jockeying the car, he thought of this, and having thought of it, acted on it. Swinging his fist from behind with all his might, he hit that hapless fellow on the point of the jaw and deposited him, stunned and temporarily helpless, on his knees in a corner of the cage. Lafitte grabbed the lever and shoved it over hard, and up the shaft shot the car. Before he could get control of it, being unfamiliar with such mechanisms and in a panic besides, it was at the top of the house. But then he mastered it and made it reverse its course, and returning downward, he pulled the lever, bringing it toward him. That was the proper motion, that gentler manipulation, for now the car, more obedient, was crawling abreast of the 3rd floor level. It crept earthward, inch by inch, and without bringing it to a dead stop, he jerked up the latch of the collapsible safety gate, telescoping the metal outer door back into its folded-up self. And stooping low because the gap was diminishing, he lunged forward. Now, that elevator boy was a quick-witted, high-tempered Irish boy. He might be half-dazed, but his instincts of belligerency were not asleep. He told afterward how, automatically and indignantly functioning, he grabbed at the departing assailant and caught him by one leg for a fleeting moment, before the other kicked free retarded him. But by all that was good and holy, he swore he did not touch the lever. Being down on all fours at the rear of the slowly sinking car, how could he touch it? Why, just at that precise fraction of a second, the elevator should pick up full speed was a mystery to him, to everybody else for that matter. But pick up full speed it did, and the Irish boy cowered down and screamed an echo to a still louder scream than his, and hid his eyes from the sight of Lafitte, with his head outside and his body inside the elevator, being decapitated as completely and almost as neatly as though a great weighted knife had sheared him off at the neck. Take the Spaniard and the Italian. Steadily they traveled westward for nearly all of that night which followed their evacuation from the Limited. It put desirable distance between them and the spot where they had dumped the special agent down. Also, it kept them warm. This was summertime, but on the desert even high summer nights are chilly, and sometimes were downright cold. Before dawn, they came on a freight train waiting in a siding. Its locomotive faced west. That suited their book. They climbed nimbly aboard a flat and snuggled themselves down behind a barrier of farm implements. Here, breakfastless but otherwise comfortable, they rode until nearly midday. Then a brakeman found them. Harshly, he ordered them to get out of there. Immediately, though, looking at them, where they were squatted half-hidden, his tone softened, and he told them he had changed his mind about it, and then they could stay aboard as long as they pleased. On top of this, he hurried forward as though he might have important news for the engine crew or somebody. They chose to get off. They had noted the quick start of recognition which the brakeman had given. They figured, and figured rightly, that by now the chase for them was on, and that their descriptions had been telegraphed back and forth along the line. The train was traveling at least 20 miles an hour, but as soon as the brakeman was out of sight, they jumped for it, tumbling like shot rabbits down the slope of the right-of-way and bringing up jarred and shaken in the dry ditch at the bottom. Barring bruises and scratches, Green had taken no hurt, but Gaza landed with a badly sprained ankle. With Green to give him a helping arm, he hobbled away from the railroad. To get away from that railroad was their prime aim now. Choosing a course at random, they went north over the undulating wastelands and through the shimmering heat, toward a range of mottled high buttes rising on beyond. It took them until deep into the afternoon to cover a matter of roughly 5 miles. By now Gaza's lower leg was elephantine in its proportions, and every forced step he took meant a fresh stab of agony. He knew he could not go on much further. Green knew it too, and in his brain began shaping tentative plans. The law of self-preservation was one of the few laws for which he had respect. They panted from heat and from thirst and from weariness. At the end of those 5 miles, having toiled laboriously up over a fold in the land, they saw close at hand and almost directly below them an adobe hut, and not quite so near at hand a big flock of sheep. At the door of the cabin, a man in overalls was stripping the hide from a swollen dead cow. Before they could dodge back below the skyline, he saw them and stood up expectantly. There was nothing for them to do except to go toward him. At their slow approach, an expression of curiosity crept over his brown face and stayed there. He looked like a Mexican or possibly a half-breed Indian. When Gaza, stumbling nearer, hailed him in English, he merely shook his head dumbly. Then Gaza tried him in Spanish, and to that he replied volubly. For minutes they palavered back and forth. Then the stranger served them with deep draughts from a water bottle, swinging at the doorway with a damp sack over it. The water was lukewarm and bitterish tasting, but it was grateful to their parched throats. Then he withdrew inside the little house, and Gaza, for Green's benefit, translated into Italian what talk had passed. "He says he is quite alone here, which is the better for us," explained the Spaniard, speaking swiftly. "He says that a week ago he came up from old Mexico seeking work. A gringo, a white man, gave him work. The white man was a sheepman. His home ranch is miles away. In a sheep wagon he brought this Mexican here and left him in charge of that flock yonder, with provisions for a month. It will be 3 weeks then before the white man, his employer, comes again. Except for that white man, he knows nobody hereabouts. Until we came just now, he had seen no one at all. So he is glad to see us. And accounting for ourselves, you told him what? Asked Green. I told him we were traveling across country in a car, and that going down a steepness last night the car overturned and was wrecked, and I crippled myself. I told him that traveling light because of my leg, we started out to find some town, some house, and that hoping to make a shortcut, we left the road. But that since morning and until we blundered upon this camp, we had been quite lost in this ugly country. He believes me. He is simple, that one, an ignorant, credulous peon, but kind-hearted. That is also plain. For proof of it, observe this. He pointed to the bloated, half-flayed carcass. He says, 3 days ago he found this beast, astray from somewhere, he knows not where. So far as he knows, there are no cattle droves in these parts, only sheep. She was sick, she staggered, she was dizzy and turned in circles as if blind, and froth ran from her mouth. There is a weed which does that to animals when they eat it, he says. So, hoping to make her well again, he put a scrap of rope on her horns and led her here. But last night she died. So, today, he has been peeling her. Now he goes to make ready some food for us. He is hospitable also, that one. And when we have eaten, then what? We can't linger here. Wait, please, senor. To my mind already an idea comes. His tone was authoritative, confident. First, we fill our empty stomachs to give us strength, and then we smoke a cigarette. And while we smoke, I think, and then we see. On frijoles and rancid bacon and thin corn cakes and bad coffee, which the herder brought them on tin platters and in tin cups, they did fill their empty stomachs. Then they smoked together, all three of them, smoking cigarettes rolled in corn husk wrappers. The Mexican was hunkered on his heels, making smoke screens in the still hot air, when Gaza, getting on his feet with difficulty, limped toward the doorway, gesturing to show that he craved another swig from the water bottle. When he was behind the other two, almost touching them, he drew the special agent's pistol and fired once, and their host tumbled forward on his face and spraddled his limbs and quivered a bit and was still, with a bullet hole in the back of his head. This killing gave the Italian, a seasoned killer as he was, a profound shock. It seemed so unnecessary, unless he started up, his features twitching, and backed away, fearing the next bullet would be for him. "Remain tranquil, senor," said the Spaniard, almost gaily. "For you, my comrade, there is no danger. There is for you hope of deliverance. You who professed last night to have hope in your soul. Now me, I have charity in my soul. Charity for you, charity for myself, charity also for this one lying here. Behold, he is now out of his troubles. He was a dolt, a clod of the earth, a creature of no refinement. He lived a hermit's life, lonely, miserable. Now he has been dispatched to a better and a brighter world. That was but kindness." With his foot he touched the sprawled corpse. "But in dispatching him, I had thought also for you, for both of us. I elucidate. First, we bury him under the dirt floor of this house, taking care to leave no telltale traces of our work. Then you make a pack for your back of the food that is here. You take also the water bottle filled. Furthermore, you take with you this pistol. Then, stepping lightly on rocky ground or on hard ground so you make no tracks, you go swiftly hence and hide yourself in those mountains until, who can tell, until those who will come presently here have ceased to search for you. With me, lamed as I am, me to hamper you, there would be no chance for either of us. But you, going alone, you, armed, provisioned, quick of foot, you have a hope." But you, what then becomes of you? You sacrifice yourself." In his bewilderment, the Italian stammered. "Me, I stay here to greet the pursuers. It is quite simple. In peaceful solitude, I await their coming. It cannot be long until they come. That man on the freight train will be guiding them back to pick up our trail. By tonight at the latest, I expect them. At the sight of the Italian's mystified face, he broke now into a laugh. "Still you are puzzled, eh? You think that I am magnanimous, that I am generous? Well, all that I am. But you think me also a fool, and there you err. I save you, perhaps, but likewise, perhaps, I save myself. Observe, senor." He stooped and lifted the dead face of his victim. "See now what I myself saw the moment I beheld this herder of ours. This man is much my shape, my height, my coloring. He spoke a corrupt Spanish, such as I can speak. Put upon me the clothes which he wears, and remove from my lip this moustache which I wear, and I would pass for him, even before the very eyes of that white man who hired him. Well, very soon I shall be wearing his clothes, my own being hidden in the same grave with him. Within 10 minutes I shall be removing this moustache. He being newly shaven, as you see for yourself, it must be that in this hovel we will find a razor. I shall pass for him. I shall be this mongrel dull-wit." A light broke on the Italian. He ran and kissed the Spaniard on both cheeks and on the mouth. "Ah, my brother!" he cried out delightedly. "Forgive me that for a moment I thought you hard-hearted for having in seeming wantonness killed the man who fed us. I see you are brilliant, a great thinker, a great genius. But my beloved," and here doubt once more assailed him, "what explanation do you make when they come?" "That is the best of all," said Gaza. "Before you leave, you take a cord and you bind me most securely, my hands crossed behind my back, so, my feet fastened together, so. It will not be for very long that I remain so. I can endure it. Coming then, they find me thus. That I am bound makes more convincing the tale that I shall tell them. And this is the tale that I shall tell. To them I shall say that as I sat under this shelter skinning my dead cow, there appeared suddenly 2 men who fell upon me without warning, that in the struggle they hurt my poor leg most grievously. Then, having choked me into quietude, they tied my limbs, despoiled me of my provender, and hurriedly departed, leaving me helpless. I shall describe these 2 brutal men. Oh, most minutely I shall describe them. And my description will be accurate. For you I shall be describing as you stand here, now. Myself I shall describe as I now am. The man from the train will say, yes, that is true. Those are surely the 2 I saw. He will believe me at once. That will help. Then they will inquire to know in which direction fled this pair of scoundrels, and I will tell them they went that way yonder to the south across the desert. They will set off in that direction, seeking 2 who flee together. When all the while you will be gone north into those mountains which will shelter you, and that, senor, will be the rich part of the whole joke. Perhaps, though, they question me further. Then I say, take me before this gringo who within a week hired me to watch his sheep. Confront me with him. He will identify me. He will confirm my story, and if they do that, and he does that, as most surely he will, why, then they must turn me loose, and that, senor, will be the very crown and peak of the joke." In the excess of his admiration and gratitude, the Italian just naturally had to kiss him again. They worked fast and they worked scientifically, carefully overlooking nothing, providing against every contingency. But at the last minute, when the Italian was ready to resume his flight, and the Spaniard, smoothly shaven and effectually disguised in the soiled shirt and messy overalls of the dead man, had turned around and submitted his wrists to be pinioned, it was discovered that there was no rope available with which to bind his legs. The one short scrap of rope about the spot had been used for tying his hands. The Spaniard said this was just as well. Any binding that was drawn snugly enough to fetter his feet securely would certainly increase the pain in the inflamed and grossly swollen ankle joint. However, it was apparent that he must be securely anchored, lest suspicion arise in the minds of his rescuers when they arrived. Here the Italian made a contribution to the plot. He was proud of his inspiration. With the Mexican's butcher knife, he cut long, narrow strips from the fresh, slick cowhide. Then the Spaniard sat down on the earth with his back against one of the slim tree trunks supporting the arbor, and the Italian took numerous turns about his waist and his arms and the upper part of his body, and tightly knotted the various ends of the skin ribbons behind the post. Unaided, no human being could escape out of that mesh. To the pressure of the prisoner's trunk, the moist, pliant lashings would give slightly, but it was certain they neither would work loose nor snap apart. So he settled himself in his bonds, and the Italian, having shouldered his pack, once more fervently kissed his benefactor in token of gratitude, wished him success, and made off with many farewells. So far as this empty country was concerned, the Italian was a greenhorn, a tenderfoot. Nevertheless, he made excellent progress. He marched northward until dark, lay that night under a murdered man's smelly blanket, behind a many-colored butte, and the next morning struck deeper into the broken lands. He entered what he hoped might be a gap through the mountains, treading cautiously along a narrow, natural trail halfway up a dauntingly steep cliffside. He was well into it when his foot dislodged a scrap of shaly rock, which in sliding over the verge set other rocks to cascading down the slope. From above, yet larger boulders began toppling over into the scoured-out passageway thus provided, and during the next 5 minutes the walled-in declivity was alive and roaring with tumbling, huge stones, with dislodged earth running fluid like a stream, with uprooted stunty piñons, with choking, acrid dust clouds. The Italian ran for dear life. He managed to get out of the avalanche's path. When at length he reached a safe place and looked back, he saw behind him how the landslide had choked the gorge almost to its brim. No human being, no, not even a goat, could from his side scale that jagged and overhanging parapet. Between him and pursuit was a perfect barrier. Well content, he went on, but presently he made a discovery, a distressing discovery which took the good cheer right out of him. There was no gateway into which he had entered. It was a dead end leading nowhere, what Westerners call a box canyon. On 3 sides of him, right, left, and on ahead, rose tremendously high walls, sheer and unclimbable. They threatened him. They seemed to be closing in on him to pinch him flat. And of course, back of him, retreat was cut off. There he was, bottled up like a fly in a corked jug, like a frog at the bottom of a well. Frantically he explored as best he could the confines of this vast prison cell of his. He stumbled upon a spring, and its waters, while painted lightly with alkali, were drinkable. So he had water, and he had food, some food. By paring his daily rations down almost to a starvation point, he might make these rations last for months. But then what? And in the meantime, what? Why, until hunger destroyed him, he was faced with that doom which he so dreaded, the doom of solitary confinement. He thought it all out, and then he knelt down and took out his pistol, and he killed himself. In one of his calculations, that smart malefactor, the Spaniard, had been wrong. By his system of deductions, the searchers should reach the adobe hut where he was tethered within 4 hours, or at most 5. But it was nearer 30 hours before they appeared. The trouble had been that the brakeman wasn't quite sure of the particular stretch where he had seen the fugitives nestled beneath a reaping machine on that flat car. Besides, it took time to spread the word, to summon county officials, to organize an armed searching party. When at length the posse did strike the 5-mile trail leading from the railroad tracks to the camp of the late sheep-herder, considerably more than a day had elapsed. The track was fairly plain, 2 sets of heavy footprints bearing north, and only lacking where rocky outcrops broke through the surface of the desert. Having found it, they followed it fast. And when they mounted the fold in the earth above the cabin, they saw the figure of a man seated in front of it, bound snugly to one of the supports of the arbor. Hurrying toward him, they saw that he was dead, that his face was blackened and horribly distorted, that his glazed eyes goggled at them and his tongue protruded, that his stiffened legs were drawn up at sharp angles of agony. They looked closer, and they saw the manner of his death, and were very sorry for him. He had been bound with strands of fresh rawhide, and all through that day he had been sitting there exposed to the baking heat of the day. Now, heat operating on damp new rawhide has an immediate effect. Heat causes certain substances to expand, but green rawhide it causes to contract very fast to an iron-like stiffness and rigidity. So in this case, the sun glare had drawn tighter and tighter the lashings about this poor devil's body, squeezing him in at the stomach and the breast and the shoulders, pressing his arms tighter and tighter and yet tighter against his sides. That, for him, would have been a highly unpleasant procedure, but it would not have killed him. Something else had done that. One loop of the rawhide had been twisted about his neck and made fast at the back of the post. At first it might have been no more than a loosely fitting circlet, but hour by hour it had shrunk into a choking collar, a diminishing noose, a terrible, deadly yoke. Veritably, it had garroted him by inches.
I took 2 runs at this one, mentally. In the first, I was climbing up my chair, my back end rising ever further, like a furious cat who realizes this is, in fact, a vet's office, as the story cheerfully describes 3 aliens murdering their way across America, pursued by the Pinkertons, who, from where we are in history right now, look a lot like the first draft of ICE. We'll drop some links in the notes about the Homestead Mill incident if you're inclined to defend the Pinkertons or if you were unaware of their long history as strikebreakers. UK band Skunk Anansie once sang, "Yes, it's political, everything's political," and when that was released I hated it because, as a song, it's not great, and also it annoyed me. Now though, I can't help but feel that what annoyed me was the subconscious realization at a young age that while the song was bad, the point was good. Also, the song's actually quite good. To be clear, I'm not criticizing escapism. God knows I spent enough time telling people they can't be on watch all the time. But the thing about escapism is that you have to be aware of what you are escaping from, and why. And in a case like this, you also have to be aware of the luxury distance can afford you. Cobb wrote of his time, and while I don't have enough knowledge to make a call about his own personal morality, I know how wildly different the concepts of humour are now from when I was growing up. Comedy and culture are a conversation, one we never start but can only contribute to, and I am reminded, oddly, of one of my favourite episodes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where Frank, played by Danny DeVito, just can't understand the idea of comedy that doesn't have a victim. And that leads me to my second read of this story, and, surprisingly, to a personal touchstone, and I suspect a touchstone for many others, the Alex Proyas movie version of James O'Barr's fantastic, horrifying graphic novel, The Crow. That's a movie and a comic intimately concerned with both fate and chance, and where they collide. And Brandon Lee purring victims, aren't we all, has lived in my head at this point for decades. But hearing that, being reminded of that story, that gave me the distance to view this story through a different lens, through context, rather than content, if you'll allow me a second bouncy sentence this host spot, and it is still just about the new year. What that distance gave me was the realization of what the true antagonist here is, and that, for me, takes any of the unpleasant reads of how these characters are depicted, and you can undoubtedly make those reads out of play. Because for me, the monster here is time. Not just death. Time. That line from Fight Club, "On a long enough timeline, the survival rate for everyone drops to 0, springs to mind, as does, commonly for me, poet Andrew Marvell. Marvell writes very famously at one point of Time's winged chariot, bearing down on all of us like a Zamboni made of horny flower metaphors for him, and creatively horrific deaths for the people that it notices in this story. And again, we jump from that to, well, let's be honest here, there is a hint of the final destinations to all of this. Time, death, entropy, call it what you want, reimagined as a Bugs Bunny-esque stinker having a little fun with its food. Here, though, that fun is playing very strictly within the rules. He chose to get on that elevator. He chose to be tied up. He chose to head out into the desert. They chose to escape. The door was unlocked. They just opened it. And what compelled them to do that had nothing to do with where they're from, and everything to do with who they are. Their own doom, keeping careful pace with them until its time comes round at last. The horror not just of what the men do, but of what the universe does to rebalance that. Hell, the very idea of a moral universe is, when looked at one way, reassuring, and when looked at another, profoundly disturbing. Because if the arc of history really does bend towards justice, then who's doing the bending? And why? And does it do that for everyone? And if not, well, that's a whole other can of worms, isn't it? Cosmic, existential horror contained in a story filled with careful charm and hidden intentions. Intentions that challenge what we see, when we see it, and whether it's really there. Nicely done, everyone. On to the subject of subscribing and support. PseudoPod is funded by you, our listeners, and we are now officially a non-profit. One-time donations are gratefully received and much appreciated, but what really makes a difference is subscribing. Our baseline subscription rate is $7 a month, and that gives us more than just money. It gives us stability, reliability, dependability, and a very well-maintained tower from which to operate, and trust us, you want those sigils nice and bright, just like we do. Anyway, if you can, please go to pseudopod.org and sign up by clicking on Feed the Pod. If you have any questions about how to support EA and ways to give, please reach out to us at donations@escapeartists.net. And if you can't afford to support us financially, we understand. Times only seem to be getting tougher. But if that's the case, then please consider leaving reviews of our episodes or generally talking about them on whichever form of social media you are disassociating through this week. We have a Blue Sky account and we would love to see you there. Find us at pseudopod.org. Also, if you enjoy merch, and I love merch, you can support us by buying hoodies, t-shirts, and other bits and pieces from the Escape Artists Void merch store. The link is in various places, including our pinned post over on that Blue Sky account. Now, before we go, some excellent news from a lifelong friend of the show. From the dark of Navajo County, the Coyote Tales thrilled listeners first here on PseudoPod. Now, the author Jim Kristofik has created Coyote Stranger, a newly revised print and ebook edition of the tales. And if you ever wondered what happened to the characters you met in the Coyote Tales, read the sequel to Coyote Stranger, The Sundown Killers. The Sundown Killers follows a group of fugitives hunting another group of fugitives across the Southwest. Navajo teenager Lakaine Kiahani joins the mysterious elder Dondo Key to pursue a taboo evil that his compassion has unleashed on the world and threatens to uproot the foundations of modern life. A sweeping tale of gods and monsters, strange humor, and offbeat philosophy, The Sundown Killers crosses sagebrush highways, rocky mountains, and canyon backroads to weave a mythic reality inside the borders of the American nightmare. Jim is the best. Such an incredibly sweet human and a fiercely talented author, and I am delighted that these books are coming out. We will have links for you, of course, in the show notes. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That means you can download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but don't change it or sell it. Theme music is by permission of Anders Manga. Join us next week for more true stories. In the meantime, PseudoPod wants you to remember, they used to exist, but don't any longer. Someone or something took them somewhere. At least, they are no longer a part of the memory of man. We'll see you next week, folks. Until then, have fun.
When you listen to a narrator or let yourself go into a story, you are letting yourself go into the car of a stranger. You are getting into the car of a stranger. You are walking in the front door of someone you do not know.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.